Kia ora everybody. I'm sitting down across the internet as usual with Jamie Scott. He's down in Christchurch, a bit closer than we'd originally planned. But mate, Jamie, I always start off with, because I think it kind of taps into what people's passions are. What did you do this weekend? We're recording this on a Sunday lunchtime, obviously. What have you been up to?
Oh, seriously, like what I did this weekend is as far removed from my passions as possible. Up until about 11:30 last night, I was just on the edge of the building about to jump as I rebuilt my entire accounting system for this year. Because my previous one crashed and decided I didn't want to talk to my bank accounts anymore. So that's fortunately, we're not too far into the financial year, but there was still a lot of work and a lot of reconciliation and line-by-line accounting. So not much related to my passions, to be honest.
Right. And so what's your knowledge on that, or was it very much following the instructions? Again, I'm as far removed from having any accountancy ability as you can possibly get. Numbers not my strong point. So just kind of start with zero, having not used it before, and learn as you go. Nice. And so what would you have loved to have been doing? I see plenty of images of you on a mountain bike, and I've got a friend in Christchurch who came a cropper up on the Port Hills. Is that a bit of you, or you keep to the flat stuff?
That's that. If I wasn't doing what I was doing, that was probably what I'd rather be doing. Well, the weather closed all the tracks down this weekend, but yeah, mountain biking is my thing. I've always I'm 45 and I've been on a bicycle for 41 years now, which makes it sound like I'm really old. But that's my thing, and I've just recently repurchased a road bike, having sold one a few years ago and kind of gave that away. But yeah, so I'm back on the two wheels and learning for the mountain biking side of things, learning a new school of biking, because I started mountain biking when mountain biking first kind of came out and was all very much like cross country type stuff, stay off the steeps, but now it's all kind of full face pads, gravity focused.
Yeah.
Which again, at 45, when you've got a kind of keen sense of self-preservation, it's kind of a little bit harder than the Groms to overcome that fear. But
yeah, on that topic, how do you sort of feel about it? Do you feel that it's honing your sort of quick reactions, or do you think it's highlighting a lack of quick reactions?
I actually think I'm pretty fortunate, I think, in that I've got kind of the good reactions and relatively good handling skills, and that's just from years of bike riding. So I understand it at that kind of fundamental basis. But yeah, I mean, there comes a point where with all mountain biking, just the talent runs out. And you can get really cocky with it. Like you do the whole thing of like, you start out on the green tracks, and then you go to the blue tracks, and then I can ride single black tracks pretty well, and I'm just starting to dabble in double blacks, and you get really cocky. I'm like, yeah, great, I'm riding these really gnarly tracks, and I haven't crashed yet, and that's really at about the point you're due to crash. So. So it's striking that balance. No, of not getting too keen, but also wanting to progress things. So.
Nice. It sounds a little bit like my my snowboarding. It's too infrequent to be any good, but I go along a black trail with friends and go, I haven't fallen over yet, and you're right. That's usually about the time that you're about to fall over. And thankfully, most of the time on the black trail and snow, it's soft stuff. But whereas if you go a little bit hard on the main tracks, that's where you usually hit ice and break a tailbone or something like that. So,
yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So let's put it into perspective for those that don't follow you on Twitter, and I'd highly recommend it if you are on Twitter, following Jamie's page. What is your background? Where does your opinion come from? Because you're not afraid to share it, and I think it's worthwhile, and it adds to a lot of good conversations on Twitter. It can be a negative of people bringing their opinion, but I think you foster a lot of good conversation. Where does your opinion come from?
Where are my opinions? Well, my background is in From a, I guess, an academic perspective, I studied sport and exercise science via a PE degree at Otago University, and then went on to do an undergraduate in nutrition science, human nutrition at Otago, and then I was going to become a dietitian, and I kind of think retrospectively kind of dodged a bullet on that one, and that possibly upset a few dietitians if they're listening, but I applied and got accepted for Hamilton, and I'm like, Hamilton, no way, I'm not going there. So went off and did a sports medicine diploma instead of the dietetics diploma, and then about 10 years later, I kind of caught up with the postgrad nutrition thing and did a postgrad nutrition medicine, which is sort of equivalent to a dietetics diploma roughly. So, and just kind of been plugging away, working in the kind of health and wellbeing space for probably 19, 20 odd years now, I guess, professionally. And I think in terms of my opinions and the things you kind of see on Twitter, and we have to acknowledge that it's very, very easy to voice an opinion in a very direct, confronting way on social media. Like, it kind of fosters that sort of thing, both good and positively and negatively. But I've always been, I guess, a fairly direct kind of a personality, which is, again, has positives and negatives. Pretty much whenever I've been in trouble at some point or another in my career, and normally as an employee, it's because I've spoken my mind a little bit too easily and freely. So I've always got lots of things rattling around in my head, and I think Twitter probably, I'm not on Facebook, and I don't really use Instagram so much for voicing my opinion, but Twitter, if I got something on my mind, people will hear about it and it's a sort of platform. If people want to follow, they can. If they don't, they can hit block, mute, or unfollow.
Yeah. So what's the sort of applications of those two diplomas that you've got? You said medical science. How does that sort of...
So sports medicine and nutrition medicine. So
yeah,
sports medicine side of it coming from my background. So the sports med diploma that you can do through Otago draws in obviously those with a medical background, those from a physical therapy background, sport and exercise science, I think a couple of others kind of do in there. And it's really to, I guess, look at things from that multidisciplinary space when you're working with athletes or those who are engaged in physical activity one way or another. So mine was very much the sport and exercise science side of things is very much looking at how to look after, say, like traveling athletes who are involved and exposed to different environmental extremes and so on, and just kind of how you manage that from a training load perspective and travel perspective and all that sort of stuff. And then the nutrition medicine diploma, which was done through a private training institute, and unfortunately it's one of the ones that kind of was around for a while and then went bust, I think, with the shake-up of that industry. But that was as kind of more a clinical take on nutrition. So my undergrad in nutrition science is basically that kind of understanding kind of nutritional physiology and nutritional biochemistry. But the nutritional medicine was actually now starting to look at things from a clinical perspective of how you're working with people suffering various conditions, pathologies, and treating it from a nutritional perspective.
I guess that brings me to a point that often at letterheads you're seeing the sort of general nutrition, public health nutrition, and then sports nutrition are sort of saying, well, I have these specific needs, or I have these specific needs. But then you look at the likes of Grant Schofield here in New Zealand, or his name escapes me, from South Africa, Professor Noakes, working and Rob Wolf in the States, working with the likes of CrossFit and that sort of stuff. And they're sort of saying, well, surely our aim across the board is to limit inflammation, whether that's, from a medical perspective, because that's often the source of these modern diseases. From a general perspective, we don't want people getting sick. And then from a sports perspective, we want people to be able to retrain, recover, and train better. Where do you think all this noise gets created and the key messages gets lost?
Yeah, like, it's a really good question. Probably in more recent times than anything else, like I've taken a real kind of convergence approach, and you look at there's loads of different mouthpieces out there who are talking about different nutritional paradigms, whether they be kind of conventional wisdom ones, whether they're kind of new ones, and we say new ones, probably ones that are kind of on their second or third time round, because these things tend to come and go in cycles. So I tend to kind of take a perspective of looking at nutrition and well-being, not from a divergent view of going, well, is it the carbs or is it the fats or whatever else, and just kind of look at it from a convergent perspective. And one of those convergent perspectives, as you mentioned, is sort of saying, well, the root cause of a lot of issues is inflammation one way or another. So what are the kind of key messages or common, what's the common ground that we all sit on that kind of helps limit that chronic inflammation in people? So I remember writing a post on a blog, it must have been, I don't know, 2015, something along those lines. And I described a lot of the people in kind of this health space, nutrition space, who are constantly kind of arguing their perspective, describe them as talking past each other. If you get all of us in the room and go, what is the common ground? Well, the common ground is things like, we don't want people eating processed and ultra-processed foods. We want people eating more kind of whole foods, nutrient-dense diets, improving lifestyle in general, blah, 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 blah. So, and these kind of things make up, I don't know, like, 95+% of the improvements that you see in individuals. So, yeah, it's really interesting. You get all these different perspectives, and they all kind of advocate and spirit for their own little kind of 1% type thing. But and people kind of miss that. Again, we all kind of sit on very, very similar ground for the most part.
Yeah, and like you just said, it's not even the 80-20 stuff. It's 95% of the way there.
Yeah.
And like I said, getting them all in one room, that sort of happened in, I think, Switzerland or somewhere last year. And sure enough, that no matter what sort of form the consensus was, it was that the likes of type 2 diabetes is reversible at a state of physiology, not ongoing continual disease, which I think that memo has been missed by many practitioners around the place. What are you sort of seeing in your space with that ability? I had Ray Kelly on here last year in Australia, and you often see him on Twitter saying, you can continue to bury your head in the sand, but look what I've done. I've reversed diabetes. What's going on? Australia's behind the eight ball, although I see that they are adopting something in Western Australia shortly. What are you seeing in your sphere in terms of getting people moving in the right direction?
Yeah, I think we've really underestimated, like, globally, just how much you can reverse or kind of reverse. And like, I loathe to use the word cure.
Yeah.
But because it's a very loaded word, but you can certainly kind of reverse and stabilize a lot of the conditions that we've perhaps historically just gone, well, unlucky for you, you've got diabetes, so that's kind of you fucked, I guess. So, and we haven't put enough emphasis on, we've underemphasized the diet and lifestyle, and everyone kind of talks, nutrition's good and lifestyle is good, but I don't think we have realized just how powerful it can be in many of these conditions, potentially because some of the advice around in the conventional field just hasn't gone quite far enough. I guess, like, if you're looking at, say, the diabetes side of things, there's always been this acceptance that, life is going to be really hard without certain foods. So a lot of the guidelines have said, well, you can still have your orange juices and you can still have your cereals and you can still have this. And if that's been your advice, then you're looking at the impact that it has on a patient. And you can go, well, they're on a good diet and it hasn't really done a whole lot to their diabetes, as an example. Therefore, maybe there's only so far we can go. And so then you have, pioneers who are kind of going, well, what happens if we take away the orange juices and the cereals, and what happens if people can just eat, good whole protein sources and good whole vegetable fiber sources, and you get them out in the sunlight and you curate good sleep and circadian rhythm patterns and blah, blah, blah. Like, just how far can you push this and what are the results? And when you start doing that, it's like, oh, damn, actually, the stuff goes away.
Hmm.
So, and I mean, and all of that's been on the backdrop of, and you'll know this as well as I do, that is against a backdrop of a highly medicalized, pharmaceuticalized model that we use for treating a lot of this sort of stuff. So there hasn't really been the kind of drive and incentive to go down the diet and lifestyle path as much as what we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm. And the sort of question that I keep coming up with in New Zealand in a a social medicine situation where, well, maybe that is an economic driving factor, and that the government's going to go broke, whereas in the likes of the states, insurers and companies who are covering the health costs of their staff are going to go broke. Where's the motivation to start to save some of this cash for the government? In the UK, what I was talking about in Western Australia, Dr. David Unwin, just working within the NHS, is reversing diabetes. It brings up the figures just for his practice and the amount of money saved on medications. We put that into it, scale that up, and the economics just seems to make sense. But from an individual level, it's that left hand not talking to the right hand sort of thing. And going back to Grant Schofield, he's arguing one point with education, but then Minister of Health and their advisors are arguing other things. So, left hand not talking to the right hand. Do you think that maybe more of an economic perspective needs to come into this to move things forward?
Oh, absolutely, because it's, again, in a capitalist society, kind of, unfortunately, economics is everything, and kind of money talks. I guess the model has been such that someone profits out of the status quo of just kind of doing it as it has been. But as that kind of model starts to break down, and you've got more and more of your workforces becoming unproductive because they're becoming sick and unable to work or whatever else, then it's no longer a case of just a small percentage of people are suffering these sorts of things, but that percentage happens to have some sort of economic activity for certain companies, whatever. Now you've got a whole society that's starting to go on the hook financially for lots of things, like if you can't get enough workers, or you're having to spend a fortune on your hospitals because you have to bring in bigger, stronger gurneys because everyone's overweight, and you're having to widen elevator doors, and it's just mind blowing when you start to kind of thread all of the economic links together and go, seriously, like if this is as good as it gets in terms of our treatment abilities, and this is what's going to cost us, we've got to start looking at some of these alternatives. And I think that's what's starting to kind of happen, is that people like Unwin can come out and go, well, this has been what's happening in my practice, and because he's no longer a lone voice, you're kind of seeing that in these disconnected practices and practitioners all around the globe going, look, this is what we can do. And I guess eventually people have to start taking notice. So it will change. I think I'm kind of confident things will change, and they will change because of the economics of it, not because it's the right thing to do, or we there's some sort of moral drive to get people off drugs or whatever else. It will just come down to the fact that it's just costing countries an absolute fortune.
No, it's pretty crazy. And then, so you're the second person that's worked in corporate wellness, and that's by pure accident. My last guest we were talking about fitness for getting ready to get out on the hill, and it just so happens that as a personal trainer, he's working with corporate wellness up in Auckland. And one of the big things that he sort of said, and he tailored it quite well, that as a personal trainer, you're actually, personally dealing with somebody, and then he's finding that from an individual perspective, the mental health thing is massive. He can have a consultation with someone, and 20 minutes of it is spent unpacking their day, their life, their week or whatever. And then from the corporate wellness perspective, the feedback he's getting is that we've created this huge teamwork, huge community resilience within our staff, and nothing to do with people's goals of losing a few kgs or getting a little bit stronger. As a team and as a community, and that's one of those pillars of health. Things have grown. So you're also dealing with Christchurch and a complete rebuild and a re-landscaping of what things look like as a business. And I suppose many businesses in Christchurch have had the chance to do a clean slate, new buildings, new structures, new layouts. What's the sort of thing that you're trying to push home when it comes to building something new of this environment, but then also the environment of the staff themselves?
Well, it's interesting because in terms of that rebuild, I have to say that I do a little bit of work kind of locally, but actually I kind of do a lot of my corporate stuff out of town as well. So it's not just a Christchurch perspective, but it's really interesting. So on the one hand, if you look at it just from a pure work environment perspective, we're talking very much kind of central city, white collar workers here. Yes, a lot of them are in flash new buildings, and those new buildings are just, I guess, in the way the engineering's going, they're dominated by glass, and so they end up being quite bright. And on that note, I had a really good contrast, I think it was late last year, going down to Dunedin, and Dunedin's interesting in that central Dunedin's very much what central Christchurch used to be like, and so it was almost kind of a step back in time and a realisation of just how old some of the Christchurch buildings were, how small and convoluted they were just by nature of their age and how they were built. A lot of them were kind of south-facing, so they ended up being very dark and everything else. And then so going down to Dunedin and going, oh, wow, this is what Christchurch used to be like, and you just felt kind of the sense of being closed in and claustrophobic in some of the buildings down there. So I come back up, and they're very kind of bright and open and everything else. So they seem good. They've got like nice kitchens, and they might have breakout rooms, the standards things of Swiss balls and foosball tables and Silicon Valley type stuff that is kind of influencing corporate layouts here. But at the same time, to, I guess, again, from that economic perspective, to kind of save fit out costs, because it's been just a horrendous cost for buildings to foot, is that a lot of these workspaces are now a very open plan. Mm-hmm. And so if you can think of one business I do work for, and it is just, for, I don't know, just potentially getting on for 50 plus, maybe even like a lot more in a relatively small space. So say 50 plus workers all working in effectively one room together with their table side by side, next to no partitioning between the tables. And so in there, you're going to have people who are extroverts, and they're going to love this kind of wide open space with loads of noise and everything else. But there's a good portion of your workforce are going to be introverts too, and that's just a freaking nightmare for an introvert to work in such a wide open, noisy space. And that's not even allowing for the fact that in these kind of wide spaces, and particularly this time of year with flu season, like it is just a cesspool of whatever bugs are going around at the time. So it's interesting on one perspective, in that people are like, oh, we'll have this like big open plan, glass building, and we'll put in a coffee machine, and everyone will be happy. But it doesn't kind of work out that way for a lot of the workers. My thing that I really focus on for the work I do on the corporate side of things, whether it's going in and talking to individuals or giving group workshops, is my thing is energy. Yeah. And so I say that energy is our currency that we will deal in. And when I talk about energy, I'm talking about, say, our physical energy, mental energy, emotional energy, and spiritual energy. And spiritual energy kind of being the big long-term picture. And so if you kind of think about those different kind of pools of energy we have, everyone kind of uses at least one, if not a couple of those in their workplace during the day. So I'll use my partner as an example. So she's an emergency medicine doctor. So she burns a lot of mental energy kind of focusing on quite acutely sick people and potentially, big traumas. So that's, there's a lot of kind of mental focus required for that. But then there's also, she has to give out a lot of empathy to people who are coming in who are feeling pretty miserable. And so she is basically paid to drain her mental and emotional energy. I do some work with Airways New Zealand, so they're some of the air traffic controllers. So you can imagine guys just sitting in the radar room controlling airspace, so big mental energy drain. You name the profession, and basically you can kind of go, well, here's what they're being paid for. They're being paid to give their energy in some form or another. So that's really what I kind of talk about when I go into the corporates. There's not so much things like health and resiliency and all the usual buzzwords. Christchurch hates the word resiliency. Everyone kind of thinks, oh, Christchurch is such a resilient city, and it's not. But I do talk about people's energy and go, the good thing with our energy is it's rechargeable. If you kind of recognize that it is and take the steps to do that. So, but people often don't. They just keep cashing in their energy day after day after day. And, they'll stick their phone on charge if it gets down to, 30% or less. But they don't stick themselves on recharge in terms of what foods are they putting in, sleep, the physical activity side of things to recharge the physical energy, light exposure, sunlight, emotional energy. So spending time with strong social connections, having that person in your life who is a source of kind of emotional energy for you. Mentally, like if you've got a job where I got an insight to an accountant's life last night doing my account. So if you're going through someone's account line by line by line, day after day after day, then there's a high mental drain. So what are you going to do to recharge that? So that's the kind of the framework that I end up using with people. And in the Christchurch situation, it's like, yep, we've got some shiny new buildings, and yes, they have some positives, but the internal environment is really not that much different from what it was pre-earthquake, and certainly no different from most other corporates these days. So,
yeah, and that brings me to another topic which I saw on your Twitter. It's great, mate. Is that the sort of this concept of breakout rooms and a coffee machine room and a lunch room is sort of depriving us of that get outside and have some time to yourself. And when you said about Silicon Valley, you hear multiple anecdotes of people living where they work because they can, and because if they work longer, then they'll be paid more, or they might be more successful, or they might get their promotion, or they, in terms of Silicon Valley, they might figure out this code which changes the world. Are you seeing a little bit of that of people being one-dimensional and heading up stuff in their job? Do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Like we're not really at the extreme in New Zealand that compared to, say, the likes of Silicon Valley and maybe some of the the high-tech kind of Asian cities where like there's almost like a campus that gets set up around a workplace. Maybe there is in New Zealand. I'm just not aware of it, but I've read a lot of stuff around that kind of that model of live nearby because then it cuts down commuting time, and yes, there's benefits to that, and have basically everything on site so that you can do 12-hour shifts or whatever it happens to be, and it's just basically a volume approach where we've decided that we'll just kind of throw more time at it, and if people don't have to leave the workplace to go and get a good cup of coffee when they might do otherwise, it's like, well, great, well we can fit a coffee machine, kind of job done. But what people aren't realizing is the benefits of having staff kind of go, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk and go and grab a cup of coffee. If they're gone for 30 minutes while they walk down the road and they go and get a cup of coffee, maybe that 30 minutes is enough for them to kind of clear their head or solve a problem or come up with an idea. Certainly it's enough for them to get a bit of bright light in their eyes, and they might stretch the legs, blah, blah, blah. So we can become a little bit too efficient in terms of some of these things that we look at in the corporate world. And one of the things I'd be very encourage people to be very cautious of when they're kind of looking at some of these, classic Silicon Valley models of how to get people to do more work, is that the burnout rates are phenomenal. Like, and they can churn and burn, like as many people who drop out of the bottom from burnout, they've got, a row of people 10 deep waiting to get in, thinking that it's all beer and skittles on the inside. Any new grad from any university who's got any sort of coding nous will be breaking a leg to get in and work for some of these companies, not realizing that the dropout rate at the other end is absolutely phenomenal. And it doesn't take too long of a research on the internet to kind of find that, people are burning out. And in my practice, one of the things, and this is part of the reason why I really focus on the energy side of things now, is that the biggest thing I see is people saying that they're feeling burnt out, or words to that effect. They'll go like they've lost their energy, they feel lifeless, they've got no vitality anymore. Like it's the language that they use all represents the same stuff, and as they are just absolutely cooked. And we've had a generation now of people going, it's all about the money, and I'll work longer hours because I can make more money and I can get ahead and I can, put a deposit on the house or buy all the toys or whatever else. But there's a realization now, increasingly, that hasn't been worth it. And if you look at some of the more recent industrial action here in New Zealand alone, you'll always have these professions go, look, we need to be paid more, and the teachers are going, yep, we need more pay, and the doctors are going, yep, we need more pay, and whoever else. But one of the things that they're all asking for now is better working conditions, and the better working conditions revolves around, we need more resources, we need more human resources, because we're all working really long hours and we're completely cooked. Mm-hmm. So that is the number one thing. And if you accept kind of this increasing kind of depletion of people's energy and vitality and the corresponding burnout at the end of that as the number one problem, then you can start looking at things like both physical and mental health consequences of that. And we all know kind of mental health is a big hot topic here and globally. And you go like, are people becoming more depressed or more anxious because of some sort of organic brain pathology, or are these just downstream consequences of people who are completely fried, absolutely fried?
Yeah, no, it's something that close to home. Have a good child is again saps your energy in a different way, and brings up the anxiety levels, and whether that's because of a lack of sleep or
right. I'll give you a really good example. And this is just a very, very recent one that it was kind of something that I was aware of, but the way this particular client voiced it really kind of hit home. So this was I caught up with a woman recently, professional, actually health professional herself, hardworking mother of 2, I think she was, struggling a little bit with her own kind of anxiety levels. And so she's got the same, professional responsibilities and pressures that we all have. There was nothing unusual there. But she said she would come home at night, and the husband worked as well, and obviously he would come home pretty knackered from his job. So she would come home to a household where her energy levels are already low, the husband's levels are already low, the kids obviously needs looking after and feeding and attention. So there's an energy drain there in and of itself. Husband goes off and parks himself up in front of the TV. Which you can judge that and you kind of go, well, that's a sign of someone who's just pretty destroyed and just needs to recover. So I can kind of understand it from that perspective. But then as the mother of the household, she doesn't get that luxury because she's got to feed the 2 screaming kids. So now she's stuck in the kitchen by herself with no adult to talk to. She's not getting that emotional recovery because there's no energy left in the husband. The kids, and she knows that she's cooking a meal for kids who are at an age where they're just pretty picky about everything, so they're probably really not going to appreciate it. And she's kind of sitting there, she goes, this is why I drink, because I'm stuck in the kitchen by myself with no one to talk to, not feeling appreciated or recognized. The kids don't appreciate me or recognize me. So, and you kind of like, you string all that together, and it's like, again, there's no kind of judgment of the individual circumstance, because I think it's just completely normal for a lot of people. And you go, far out, this is the world that we live in, where you got two people who are off developing their professions and trying to earn money so that they can pay for the stuff, but it's coming at such a high energy cost. And you kind of you extrapolate that out and go, what's the end game on that scenario where you've got two people who are so lifeless and lacking energy when they come home that they can't give each other some energy in the relationship? The kids are probably going to suffer from that. You can already see some abhorrent health behaviors starting to occur in terms of the drinking and so on and so forth. But and this is normal everyday life. And so you plant the seed. I plant the seed with people and go, look, start thinking about things in terms of energy, and get people to think about what behaviors are they engaged in that are actually just sucking the energy out of them versus putting it back in. You might go, well, I don't have time to go for a walk in the sunlight for 10 minutes in the middle of the day, but what is going to be the price of that if you stay sat down inside with no natural light, not moving, and then come home at night and you've just got no energy to engage in a relationship? Like, what's going to be the long-term cost of that? Or
absolutely, it's we start to go back. Well, we've made all this progress, but we live in this isolated world where traditionally, even one generation ago, I know I had my grandparents available, but my daughter's grandparents are still working, and that was partly why we moved back to New Zealand, was to be closer to them, and they've been great as well. But just that level of support and stuff as well. And like I said, now we're in a situation where two people are working most commonly to survive and move forward, and it's just crazy. When you said there about energy, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but definitely in Australia and being up around near Byron Bay, there's plenty of hoopla going on about 5G rollout that's going to happen over there, because their internet's shocking. But you said about that massive open area room and 50 plus people, 50 plus devices, all humming. And we had this experience in February when we came back. We were sleeping in the lounge. It wasn't until the last night that we were having terrible sleeps. It wasn't until the last night that we turned the TV off and the quietness that went over the room. How much do you think the hum of 50 plus devices in an open area is having on people? And like I said, I don't know what your opinion on that is.
I've got an opinion on everything, Ryan. Whether that's backed up by any sort of solid knowledge or sound reasoning is a moot point. But listen, you can go through a lot of the research and they'll go, look, there's no issues with some of the stuff, but at the same time there's emerging research, and I think there was a 60-minute expose over in Australia that looked at kind of problems with like Wi-Fi and cell phone towers that caused a bit of a ruckus over there. But look, it's all of this stuff is kind of background, as you say, background hum, background radiation. It kind of almost has to have an effect. Like it's such a stretch to kind of go, look, you're introducing sources of radiation, and we're like, it's radiation is again a bit of a loaded word. We're surrounded by it each and every day, a lot of natural sources, but as you're introducing these kind of wavelengths at certain frequencies and certain powers and certain exposures that we perhaps haven't had on the evolutionary basis. And that's always my default is to kind of go from an evolutionary biology side of things. What are we most adapted to? It's like, well, we've had, thousands upon thousands of generations of being adapted to the normal background radiation levels that kind of fluctuate just on the Earth's surface and coming in from space. but have we really been exposed to the types of things from like 5G and Wi-Fi sources and everything else? It's like, no, we haven't. So I suspect that there is an effect there, and some people will be more acutely aware of it than others. Some people will be more acutely sensitive to it than others. So, I mean, I think it's pretty good practice to try and dampen these things down as best you can.
Yeah, Greg Emerson, who I've had on a couple of times, he's an integrative doctor in Australia. He brought up a point the other day that astronauts quite often get herpes virus regenerating, or whatever causes glandular fever. That virus as well, regenerating when they're in space. And he sort of termed it that, should we really be living in metal boxes with artificial light surrounded by huge doses of radiation? I was like, well, that's one way of looking at it, I guess.
Well, it's really like, it's actually quite like that now. I've not kind of heard it before, but I mean, yeah, astronauts and even pilots are exposed to huge levels of radiation compared to the background, just because of the altitude that they fly at. And I mean, it's kind of known that has an effect. And I guess in terms of, everyone's kind of going, oh, let's go to Mars and let's kind of do all these kind of deep space explorations. And I don't think we've quite kind of solved some of the biological problems that might occur, because humans aren't very well adapted to that. But one of the things that I've always talked about from the physical activity side of things is when you kind of look at the fact that we sit down for good portions of the day and we don't really move, and we have all these labor-saving devices, it's almost like we have created a low-gravity environment here on the Earth's surface, or a zero-gravity environment, because we've kind of contracted out some of the gravitational loads to various things, chairs, devices, trolleys, whatever else, because it's easier and more efficient. And so it's kind of interesting to hear someone else kind of go, well, living in these kind of small metal boxes with huge amounts of background radiation is just like traveling around in space. And I'm like, well, yeah, it's a really good point. Maybe we are becoming kind of astronauts on Earth in a way. And again, if you kind of look at the physiology of what happens to astronauts in terms of muscle loss and bone loss and viral outbreaks and whatever else, it's like, it's an interesting perspective.
Mate, I saw that you're promoting Professor Frederick Leroy coming to Christchurch, and thankfully this episode is going to be out before then, the 30th of July. What is it about his take on agriculture and meat? I've brought it up here. The title of his talk is going to be "Is Meat a Scapegoat? How we've arrived at today's polarization of meat's place on the plate." And one of the things that you continue to hammer home, and it's going back to this anxiety and depression, and then anemia in many of your female clients who are petrified of meat and the public health messaging behind meat and fat. First off, why are you so keen on hearing and promoting Professor Leroy's message? And two, what's your message to do with this?
Professor Leroy's, he puts things into a really good historical perspective, and it's easy to kind of get caught up in sound bites, particularly on the social media side of things. Whether I necessarily agree with some of the sound bites or not, they're kind of out there, and to have someone such as Professor Leroy go, okay, well, look, here's the person or organization saying this thing. Let's just kind of step back through the history of that and kind of see what the source of it is. And he takes it a long way back, particularly in terms of some of the religious links, the Seventh-day Adventist links to promoting things like plant-based diets and whatever else. And as I've become older, and I think this is a kind of hallmark of getting older, is that you come to appreciate history a little bit more than what you do when you're younger. When you study history at school and at university, you're like, oh, history, seriously? It's like one of the most tedious subjects ever. Like, do I have to do this? And then you kind of get to where I am now, and you're like, oh, actually, the history is important to understand where things have come from. So I really appreciate that about Professor Leroy. In terms of my perspective, my background is such as I'm very much a biology first, and certainly heavily influenced by the evolutionary side of things on that front as well. And if I could look at the whole meat versus plants type thing, or if you look at that scenario in a very simplistic term and go, hey, look, well, let's do away with meat because animals don't die, and then there's potential environmental benefits, blah blah blah, and you did that, and everyone could live happily ever after, I'd be like, okay, cool. Well, let's take a look. But the reality, when you go from the biological perspective, is that it leaves massive gaps nutritionally for people, and there's a lot of rewriting of biology going on to kind of suit certain plant-based or vegan narratives at the moment. But you only need to kind of go online and actually start. If you do a search for like vegan dietitians, and so these are people who are like heavily invested in promoting a vegan message, and there's some really good vegan dietitians out there who go, okay, cool, you want to do a vegan diet, great, this is what you need to think about, here are the gaps, and they'll list out these big nutritional gaps, and they're all the nutritional gaps that exist because you've eliminated animal-based protein out of the diet. So it's not me as a promoter of people eating meat saying that there are gaps. These are people who are promoting a vegan diet who are saying that there are these gaps. So it leaves big gaps. Those gaps, when they're not filled, are obviously going to create health problems. Most people these days, when, like I go back to my training where, that's a vegan diet is an option for those who want to go down that pathway, but it takes a lot of planning to keep it very well balanced, and there's a lot of hard work. It's like, yep, okay, so you can probably make a vegan diet work if you're prepared to fill those gaps, mess around with different food combinations, take certain supplements, blah, blah, blah. But jump forward to where we are now in our busy world that we have, no one does that. And so they just go, right, well, I'm going to be vegan now, and I will eliminate meat products, leave these massive gaps. They might feel good for 6 months, maybe up to 2 years, and at that point their body loses the ability to kind of buffer some of those gaps and starts kind of breaking down. So the biological argument as applied to most people just doesn't work. It's not an easy thing to do. It's not just a case of take the meat out or do a one-to-one swap of I'll take the animal protein out, but I'll put a plant protein in on a one-to-one basis and call it good. That just doesn't work. And then on the environmental side, and this is like, I really sympathize with the environmental side because I'm a greenie myself, if you want to call me that. But you have to look at it from like in context, and in the New Zealand context, the thing I kind of bang on about the most is that it's really intensive dairy. Like if we're going to point the finger at any sort of agriculture, it's intensive dairy farming that has the biggest footprint, both carbon and other sources of pollution. So why is there not the conversation to get people to have less dairy products? Why is it just to throw all the meat out or throw all animal products out? So there's some big questions around it, and people like Professor Leroy and others are starting to kind of find their voice and go, well, actually, here's the realistic numbers around farming and agriculture, and even in some of like the places with relatively big farming footprints like the US and other countries. They go, look, if everyone went vegan tomorrow, it's not going to solve the crisis in terms of climate and global warming and whatever else. And whilst we're all kind of arguing whether we should give up farming or give up meat or whatever else, fossil fuel companies still kind of go unchecked. And the real big polluters of the planet just kind of get to keep on doing their thing, and we're all kind of arguing and bickering as to whether or not veganism's the way to go. So I just see so many holes in that whole kind of argument around plant-based diets, veganism, whether it's from the individual health perspective, and I pick up a lot of the pieces from individuals, and it is unfortunately women who are bearing the biggest brunt of it, because I think from a psychology perspective, women are women always want to do the right thing. They're very deeply sensitive to what's going on. They're probably a little bit more in tune with, I guess, the planet and environmentalism than your average guy, and it's a very kind of sweeping generalization, but it seems to be kind of more true, and they're more likely to internalize some sense of responsibility for doing the right sort of thing. So I will see a lot of women just go, right, well, that's it. I'm, for the good of my health and for the good of the planet, and to do something right for my kids, or whatever it happens, the argument in their head happens to be, they decide to give up meat, and then they start running into problems with anemia, and anemia is on the rise here. As I said, my partner's an emergency department doctor, and she has to send some girls who are coming in away for blood transfusions. They are so anemic, like they are just absolutely empty of iron. Zinc deficiencies on the rise, anxiety levels are on the rise, and that can probably be traced back to amino acid deficiencies. And certainly where I've corrected people's diets and women who have been very, very anxious, that anxiety has gone away and they've been able to come off medication. So I get really, really frustrated that this message, this very, very simplistic message that is full of moralizing and virtue signaling and status signaling and all the other bullshit that goes with it, takes a really, really heavy individual toll on some people's health. And then, if people can't make it work, they kind of get blamed by whatever group. It's like, if you can't make a vegan diet work, we just weren't doing it well enough, or you weren't veganing hard enough, and that's not peculiar to veganism. It goes with a lot of different dietary paradigms, but it's just nuts. Like, it is absolute nuts, and it needs more voices like Professor Leroy to kind of balance things out a little bit. So, like, I'm pretty excited to hear what he says, and just on the basis of the title, to say, is meat being made a scapegoat? I think, like, that's kind of bang on. Is that it is both at a public level and perhaps a global level, but certainly at an individual level, for some people's health, meat is often made a scapegoat. Like, I will get a lot of people who will go, oh, well, I've got such and such a problem going on. Maybe it's all the meat that I eat. And then you look at their diet and go, well, one, you don't really eat a lot of meat to start. And two, like, you're basically drinking a bottle of wine every night. You're eating a shit ton of ultra-processed grains and carbohydrates, loads of sugars, blah, 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 blah. And you're blaming the meat out of all of that. Like, it just, it's messy.
Yeah, I'd say. And I think from a New Zealand perspective, something that Dom Rapson brought up with me is that many of these people that are pushing the vegan message are in more tropical climates. And you brought up the fact of flu season in New Zealand, and if your immune system's down, you're gonna suffer. Also, if you don't have the sunlight, which maybe is the reason why we get such bad flu season in New Zealand, again, your immune system's going to be down, and things fall to pieces. So maybe it won't be the magical 2-year mark. It might be, like you say, a 6-month mark. One winter.
It's actually very, very rare that you see someone who will kind of make a dietary change to the point where they're starving themselves, I guess. And vegan's an extreme version of that, but it's not the only version. And the human body is pretty remarkable in terms of its resilience, and it's hormonally and by other ways it can buffer some of these short-term kind of variations in terms of its nutrient intake. It has to. Like, if you're thinking again from an evolutionary perspective, if we were suddenly in a situation where there was no food available for a week and we completely fell apart, you and I would be talking to each other now like human beings would have been long gone. So we do have the ability to buffer for a very, very long period of time this lack of nutrition. And I think in terms of the meat side of things, like, a lot of there's been more and more recent research and position statements coming out to say that we need to stop talking about protein and actually start talking about amino acids and start treating amino acids like they are micronutrients rather than kind of talk about crude protein as a macronutrient, because it can lead people astray pretty quickly. So if we kind of go, okay, well, we need certain amino acids to run all sorts of various functions, and those amino acids can either act directly as neurotransmitters themselves, or are the precursors to neurotransmitters, or building blocks for hormones, or various other signaling compounds. Like if we're missing out on those, we can buffer that loss to a degree, and the way we buffer it is turn to our biggest amino acid pool, which just happens to be our muscle mass, and we can harvest amino acids out of that to some degree to kind of keep things going. But is that really what you want in a population that's already pretty weak and fragile? I guess from a physical perspective, is just have them depleting their amino acids out of their muscle mass at a higher rate. And we've talked already about mental health and anxiety, and that's and economic impact. You kind of think about it from a economic productivity side. If you've got a whole lot of people who are just kind of trapped in their head because they've got some sort of dietary deficiency going on there, that's not going to be great for the economy. So from an immunological perspective, I've got some really, really good papers sitting on my hard drive, and one in particular that talks about, it kind of shows that most organisms, when they are unwell, they will shift their diet in order to treat that illness or disease or whatever else. And a lot of organisms start selecting a higher protein intake when they are not particularly well. And mice are a good example. They will tend to kind of eat higher protein foods when they've got like a viral infection. I think another example is cockroaches, and even right down to a bacterial level. I think it said in this paper that bacterium can kind of shift their resource use over to more amino acid base. So there's a degree of immunological protection that goes with having that higher amino acid intake. And when you take that away or shift it or create gaps, then immunity suffers. And I've got no doubts. And again, it's very interesting sharing a house with a doctor and hearing what she sees. I've got no doubts that some of the things that we're seeing in society today are a result of a malnourished population. People getting hit by the flu. I find it really strange in a year in New Zealand where the uptake for flu vaccines have been the highest they've ever been, that the flu rates are equally high. So it just happens to be a strange coincidence that a whole lot of people getting vaccinated are also kind of coming down with the flu. So hospitalizations from measles, that's going up, and that was a previously rare thing. So even those who have been, there's problems around kind of vaccination levels, but generally getting hospitalized with measles wasn't something that you need to worry about. That's starting to increase. So people when they get sick, they get really sick. They fall over much, much faster than I think they have done historically, and they take a lot more care and resources to kind of bring them back. And I've got very, very little doubt that there's a huge dietary factor in there, and then other lifestyle stuff. And you mentioned sunlight exposure and vitamin D, and that's something that I've talked about for many years as well. Is that vitamin D, cold and flu season always corresponds with the lowest points of vitamin D status in the population, and I think it's fairly well understood that those two are linked. So New Zealand's just far enough south that we basically lose our ability to make vitamin D from about March, April onwards, and don't get it back until September.
Yeah, I know. There's question marks around the efficacy of it, but I've upped my fish oil intake over the last few weeks to try buffer that. And then you're speaking about buffers and amino acids and things, and one of our greatest buffers is our bone sources. And I've got some broth on there, and it's not about minerals; it's about amino acids and collagen that come from the broth that you drink. But again, joints and bone health and breakages and all those sorts of things sarcopenia, the muscle pulling on the bones, and
Yeah, well,
bone
it's
strength.
interesting. So when there's a phenomenon called splenic extraction. So what that is when you are under stress or acutely unwell, or maybe you're recovering from a surgery or something along those lines, your internal organs, liver, spleen in particular, they just hoover up amino acids at 1,000,000 miles an hour, because they are the kind of prime building blocks for your body to kind of repair itself and recover from that stress and kind of regain some sort of strength and resiliency again. But if you haven't got those amino acids coming in through the top hatch, as it were, the body has to get them from somewhere, and so it will just draw down muscles, bones, and so your tissue quality drops. You get weaker, bones get more fragile. We open the episode talking about mountain biking, and mountain biking is one of those sports where, because of a couple of high-profile elite athletes being vegan, everyone's in a race to become a vegan mountain biker, and then they have the most minor of crashes, and they're fracturing bones. And you go, like, yeah, you're doing a sport where you're invariably, if you crash hard, you're going to break a bone, but if you're just toppling over, you shouldn't be fracturing your bones. So there's just not enough energy involved, and yet these very, very low energy crashes are resulting in bone fractures. In fact, Anastasia, again, doctor partner there, she'll see fractures in the ED clinic where people have had a very, very low energy topple over. And then we're not talking about oldies, we're talking about kind of average young adults who have fractured a bone because they've fallen over on the carpet at home. And you're like, that's not normal. That is just not fucking normal. So
yeah, no, that's pretty crazy. Also, what would be interesting when we go to the economics of this way of eating, with Professor Leroy, is if he mentions the fact that New Zealand's arable accessibility is pretty low, and a lot of it we've put houses on, and you only need to go to South Auckland and see that amount of land is decreasing by the day, and then back to you saying about our probably biggest environmental impact is dairy, which is improving dramatically, and then where the meat comes from is this really questionable land, and something I'm passionate about. Deer, they're on an even lower quality land. But when you talk about the economics of a population eating vegan, where are we getting all our food from? Because go to the farmers market right now and see what sort of vegetables you get and what sort of processes, protein sources you can get right now that is not a meat source. And what are you going to eat?
Well, that's it, and like you've hit the nail on the head, because it's you just want to sit down with people and go, okay, well let's play the end game with this, and so we do away with all farming, all animal protein farming, one way or another. Like, so where does our food come from? We just do not have the ability to grow some of the crops that are supposedly adequate protein sources. Those where they are grown, it's monoculture for the worst part of it. It requires huge amounts of inputs, because you have to protect those crops, because now you're relying solely on those, and if they fall over one way or another due to climate or pests or whatever else. So there's a huge amount of inputs there with sprays, and then the end products themselves are generally, they're not necessarily something that you can consume in a whole state, so they have to be processed and turned into something else, and then that leads to problems as well. So it's just absolute craziness. And then, like, as you say, even just in terms of growing good vegetables, and you kind of mentioned South Auckland, like I think here in Christchurch, so there's a suburb here in Christchurch called the Marshlands, and it is exactly what it sounds like. It's it's old marshland, good kind of peaty soil, and great for growing huge amounts of vegetables. And actually, a grower from in that area was one of my clients recently. He's a pretty good athlete as well, and he still runs his farming or crop a vegetable growing system on some of that land. But a lot of his neighbours have kind of sold up because property developers are coming in and going, well, you're right on the edge of town, and you're only 20 minutes drive away from work. So we're going to offer you X number of $1 million for your land. And as this client said, he goes, that's a lot of years of growing vegetables to get that sort of money for that sort of land. So they're just selling it, and they've just asphalted, they've drained and asphalted over this kind of prime growing land. And it's like, you can't just kind of pick the vegetable growing up and then just kind of move it sideways and go, we'll just go and do it over there, because it doesn't work on anything other but those soils. And so yeah, we've got a great country, and it's not without problems, and certainly they can be addressed. They're not insurmountable, I don't think, but we've got a great country for having cattle, deer, sheep, just eating pretty marginal land. It can be kind of mixed use in terms of kind of forestry and grazing. You look at, there was the Royal Society report that came out maybe a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, that showed what the carbon footprint of the various kind of farming systems in New Zealand were, and for sheep and cattle, it's been decreasing. I think it's under 1991 levels, which was always kind of one of the key goals, I think, for the Kyoto climate treaty. So the efficiency of the farmers is like, we get more protein per animal for a fewer number of animals, just through selective breeding and breeding for larger breeds and stuff like that. So they're just becoming more and more efficient, and the biggest footprint did and does still sit with dairy, and that there is they are making improvements. I guess I'm kind of a little bit touchy on that, being kind of in Canterbury and kind of seeing some of the mass dairy conversions and the problems that's having with the waterways here. But it's like to kind of do away with all of that, and then kind of live with the notion that we can just grow plant-based stuff with no consequence whatsoever is just absolute craziness. It doesn't work. Like it will not work.
Yeah.
And I get like, and there's one thing that I had to remind myself that I really wanted to bring up on this talk, was that when you look at some of the people who are kind of pushing this, and I'm not talking about, like your 16-year-old girl who's decided that meat is murder and she wants to save the planet. Like that's just kids. I'm talking about like, 50, 60 something men who are going, this is the way of the future. And I can think of a couple of fairly well-off movie producers who have started going down the pathway in this country recently. And I'm like, you bastards, like, you guys have had your time. You've built your bodies. Like, you're in, like, it sounds bad, but like you're kind of in the twilight years of your life. You're kind of getting out towards retirement age. You've done your thing. You've had your body. You've eaten your meat, whatever else. And now, because you've spied an economic opportunity, you're going, well, this is the thing that everyone needs to do now. And if you don't do this, then, you're screwing the planet up. And you look at over and over again, whether it's in this country, whether it happens to be bloody, movie producers or doctors or other kind of health professionals in the US, they all seem to be fucking cookie cutters of the same type of people. They're all like older white guys who are going, we need to go down this pathway and everyone needs to do this thing, and they just happen to have something for sale as a result.
Yeah.
Or they've invested in some sort of bloody plant or production or whatever else. And I'm like, come on. Like, so you've got 60-year-old guys who are asking 16-year-old girls to cash their bodies and their health and their potential in for what? So so that they've got a slightly better retirement, and people need to wake the fuck up to this sort of stuff going on and see through it, see through it for what it is.
Absolutely.
Something really pisses me off.
Yeah, and I'm really interested into that certain movie producers farm in the Wairarapa. What's happening to that? Because that's always one that's puzzled me immensely.
Well, and you know, like, and I'm going to go out on a limb and probably open myself up for all sorts of shit here, but you look at the movie producer's wife, and like, I hate going down this pathway because I really get annoyed when other people do it. But if she's being held up as the poster woman of plant-based diets and health, and even the men to a very large degree, you kind of like, come on, like, I with my background, I tend to look at people and go like, do they look like physically strong, robust people? I don't care what their cholesterol numbers are like or anything else like that. If I can see your rib cage through your chest wall, you are not a healthy person. You're a starving person. And is that what we want to sign up our young girls and young women to from an earlier age? It's bullshit.
Yeah, no, and then they've already got their hands full with the likes of endometriosis and PCOS, and like I said, anxiety, depression. It's happening earlier and earlier. Do we want to make that worse?
None of them are related. None of those things are related to each other. There's just so many unlucky people in this country who have got a laundry list of things going wrong with them that all happen just to be very individual, unrelated things and have nothing to do with the way they eat or live. So.
Yeah. No. I listened to a fascinating conversation this week, and you brought up the fact that, as girls at 16 and 17 and then boys in their early 20s, we really have no idea, and we think we've found the answer and we can save the world. But Jeff Ross's son, who's the owner of Moa, they've just purchased Lake Hawea Station, and his son has done some studies into ecology, and he describes himself as an ecotarian. So he is essentially vegan, but will eat meat of an ecology. So he is actually a hunter, which is, I think whilst it is quite a good perspective, it's also again an ideological perspective, because in reality, how is he going to get out there all the time? Although an animal does feed you for a long period of time, so there is that, and having Lake Hawea Station, he's got great access, so that's also good. But he brought up the fact, and it changed my behaviours straight away. I booked 2 flights the other day and did, for the first time, theoretically offset my carbon emissions. And he said that currently Lake Hawea Station is running at negative carbon, and their hope, with the help of Billion Trees, and there's someone that's actually going to try and use that initiative, and the likes of Air New Zealand offsetting their carbon emissions, they hope to be at 10 times carbon neutral. So when we talk about the impact of these high country sheep and beef stations, there's one that already is going great guns and looking to be even better. So, it's pretty...
Yeah, and there are countless examples of that. And I'm as a signed up card carrying member of the Green Party and being an urbanite, I'm not supposed to be sympathetic and friendly to farmers, but I really am. There's so many great examples of farmers doing some fantastic stuff. And there's some people out there who are scumbags in terms of how they run their operations and certainly how they treat some of their animals, but they are absolutely in the minority. There's been farming systems which we can kind of look back with a historical perspective and go, that wasn't a great way of doing stuff, but hindsight's 2020. And then I think the new breed of farmers, they want to look after the land, they want to do the right thing, they want to have a future. And so they are looking at their properties and going, well, what can we do? What can we do in terms of planting? What can we do in terms of habitat restoration? Can we create native tree or native bush islands within the property, and then ring fence those islands against predators. And so now you've got the ability for birds to kind of hop between the various islands, and if you were able to kind of connect that up across the certain kind of tracts of land. So they're all doing like fantastic stuff, but at the same time, we need to like recalibrate the system to incentivize people to do it. Because so one of the things that I'm really strong on is that human beings are always products of their environment. They will always follow the path of least resistance. They will always seek to conserve energy and resources. And so if you have an environment, economic, political, that doesn't really allow farmers to easily do the right thing, they're not going to do it, particularly when they've got constraints on them. And a lot of the farmers who are doing the right thing are the ones having to kind of opt out of the current system and go it alone. Hopefully that's starting to change with some of the initiatives that are out there. But we need custodians of the land, and that could be in certain places. It's obviously going to be like iwi, or it could be the Department of Conservation at a governmental level, but it also has to be farmers. And so we have to get everyone on the same page and doing the right thing. But if the answer to that is elite urbanites going, well, farmers just need to walk off the land and let their animals roam and leave them alone and whatever else, it's like, you're not going to get the changes that we need to make.
Yeah, and as I said to you, I'm in Hawke's Bay now, and I saw an ex-custodian who lives next door to a good friend of mine. The whole top of his farm was Kiwi2, and I think it's something like 34% of Kiwi2 land is on sheep and beef farms. I get emails from Beef and Lamb New Zealand and Dairy Industry New Zealand, and there's always mention about environmental plans on there. Went to plenty of meetings with the and like I said, Hawke's Bay, they're well down the road in terms of that water quality. Unfortunately, for the farming perspective, that dam didn't go ahead, but then that was considering, well, what are we going to do downstream to the water quality? But yeah, and while I was in the Waikato, went along to plenty of the plan change meetings there, and for the most part, it was positive. How are we going to do it? What are we going to do? But shit, we need some help with this, because this is going to be bloody expensive to do. They weren't. The kickback wasn't, oh, this is how we're farmed, this is how we're always going to do things. It's, hey, I'd love to do those sort of things. I'd love to make my farm better, and but in the economic reality of it is it's just quite difficult to do, especially when I can't self-lease right now, and meat prices are they're doing quite well at the moment, but ironically, but previously.
Well, that's the thing, though, isn't it? And like Canterbury is probably a good example of that with the dairying, where the incentive has been to get rid of all the shelter belts, to put big bloody irrigators on, and build all these systems up. But it's kind of been done with the promise that over time they'll make a fortune through white gold. And probably like a good portion of these farms have made the conversions have probably done it on tech, like they've done it through kind of financing and credit and everything else. It's like they're just not in a position now. They back themselves into a corner. They can't suddenly turn around and go, okay, well, times have changed, so we need to kind of convert back again. That would just absolutely break them. And so they do need a lot more assistance to at least kind of stop the expansion, or look at how they can kind of offset some of the issues that are going on. And I am in favour of a bit of destocking in that regard, being more efficient. Maybe we kind of, like, it's always a hard one economically, but we do really seriously need to look at what is the environmental cost for us just to sell milk powder to China, when, as you say, like, meat prices are doing okay at the moment. And there's an economic opportunity here, I think, like, as more and more countries kind of wrestle with, do they do plant-based type stuff and whatever else, there's going to be a market for good quality grass-produced meat, where you're ticking all of the right environmental boxes, And one of the arguments has always been that like we really need to kind of do it really well right now, because if we don't, another country is going to beat us to it. And I'm thinking the likes of maybe Scandinavian type countries, South American countries, Uruguay, places like that. Like if we don't kind of reclaim the clean green New Zealand brand, which is, I think, it's kind of had some of the gloss washed off it in recent times. So we don't reclaim that, someone else is going to do it, and then there is no economic opportunity because we're kind of locked out of some of those kind of key marketplaces. But
yeah, and I know Ireland already has taken that green branding, which fits quite well with their sort of national emblems and stuff like that, and it's a topic that's been brought up in many of the meat producing circles in New Zealand. That, oh shit, they've got the hop on us here. So, and one sort of thing going back to the ecology of it all is, when we talk about economics and then incentivizing, can we, it's scale is a touchy thing. And can we, lots of these large scale farms are managed in small blocks. Can we increase the ecology of those small blocks? And we try battle agriculture with tourism in this country. Can we bring a couple of those a bit closer together? Because there's plenty of people coming to New Zealand wanting to see native forests, and if we send all of them to the high country, that's going to be bloody destroyed. But if we can have them on some of the lower country, more accessible ecology of New Zealand, well, maybe that's another way of looking at things.
Absolutely. Like there's so many really good opportunities and answers, but this is the issue. It's just like, if we look at where's the current debate, well, it's so binary. Like the general public are like, well, we just need to stop farming, or we all need to go vegan and eat less meat, or whatever. Like there's no kind of subtlety to it whatsoever. And I think like such a good portion of that is an increasing, as New Zealand's become increasingly urbanized, you now have like an entire generation of people who have like, they've not been outside the city limits. And so they don't actually know or understand what goes on a farm. They don't know a farmer. They don't know and see what farmers do and how they care for their animals for the most part. Like, there's been some guys who have been absolute scumbags, and the system's kind of been robust enough to kind of pick them up, and they've gone for a bit of a skate through the courts. But your average farmer, if it's horrid weather, like it was freezing cold and dumping snow, your average farmer's not going to sit in at home and go, oh well, all of my stock up on the top paddocks, they're probably going to die in the snowstorm, but fuck them, it's too cold for me to go outside. No, they're off out with the dogs. Yeah, because their livelihood is at stake, but two, and primarily because they actually do care about their animals. Yeah. But your average teenager, 20-something, who has grown up in central Auckland or Hamilton, Wellington, Christchurch, Dunedin, and doesn't venture outside much of those cities, maybe to jump on a plane and go to Australia or wherever else, they just don't understand any of this sort of stuff. So, and the only understanding they have is what they're getting fed through social media, which is a very myopic, one-sided, distorted view.
And it's interesting to bring up that getting out there to save the stock, and sure enough, coming from Southland, the day that ewes drop their lambs is 2 days before a snowstorm hits, and the amount of plant that's invested in housing for young animals on farms down there is just unbelievable. And like I say, it's their replacement stock, but every single one of those lambs is being saved, and same with cows, and calving and lambing is actually a full-on thing. The amount of times that farmers intervene with that, one to save the mother, one to save the animal, and then quite often they're not to treat that to full health, is people just do not understand that. And it's quite funny you're saying about people don't know farmers anymore. It's the exact same conversation we've been having on this podcast with hunters, is people don't know hunters anymore, and don't understand that harvesting an animal is such a minimal part of going out hunting. I went out two weekends ago, heard two in close proximity, heard a few down the valley having a squeal at dawn, but that was the greatest day ever, walking out there amongst regenerating manuka. There was the odd bit of wilding pine, but that was right next to pine country. But again, it's those things about let's plant trees, and it's like, well, what are we planting? Are we wanting ecology, or are we wanting economics? It's so bizarre.
Well, and so you talk about the kind of economics side of it, and farmers working pretty hard to save their animals. I will be correct if I'm wrong, but when you think about, say, some of the time and inputs that they might need to put in to saving individual lambs and whatever else, it might actually be cheaper and easier for them to just go, oh, either let them die or just shoot them and replace them with another one.
Yeah.
But they don't do that because they actually care. Like there's they're not going to just go reach for the gun and go, well, we'll just do away with this one. And same with hunters. I'll confess this. Like I don't have a lot to do with hunters, you also have to be really, really careful too. That you always hear stories of bloody hunters down in riverbanks and whatever else just shooting off guns, and there's this kind of real stereotypical redneck American style profile that's built up around hunters, but that's not the case. New Zealanders are probably, Cantabrians at least might be a little bit sensitive to anything to do with guns at the moment, post the recent shootings. But again, these are people out there who, they're involved in conservation efforts to one degree or another. Even if it's just at the most simplistic of levels, where they're basically shooting a pest on the land. That's a level of conservation, but they're often out there doing other stuff. And I know a lot of the hunters will work directly with the Department of Conservation and let them know about certain stuff that they've seen and heard, or doing counts of herd numbers, for certain things, so they can be better managed and whatever else. And even on the guns front, there's been a lot of hunters who have come out and go, yep, that's some of the stuff that's been called for post the Christchurch shootings are correct. And
yeah, no. If anyone wants a great Instagram account to follow Ryebush. He's a guy from down south that they've got an awesome lambing pen, and every day they during lambing they go into the shed and show you what those lunatics are up to. Lambs are great fun. It's a good way to put good way to put a smile on your face.
Very, very small farm in the country until I was about 12, so I miss those days. Miss the days of when the lambs running around. We used to have them come in the house.
Nice, yeah. No, we were 2 acres and a bit of the same. Mate, this has been working in, a little bit of a long time coming, but it's been well worth it. Where do people find you? As I said, your Twitter page is excellent. Is that about it?
I think it's my most accessible one. I am on Instagram, Jamie Scott, one word, _MTB. If you really want to see pictures of a 45-year-old guy trying to chuck himself down the side of a mountain on a bike. I can't imagine that's too appealing for most people. But yeah, otherwise the Twitter account, I don't even know my own Twitter handle.
Jamie Scott. It'll be in the show notes here.
Find that. I'm not as prolific on Twitter as I used to be. I am trying to pull it back because it is one of those things that kind of sucks you in and sucks a lot of time and energy when I've got a lot of other stuff to do now that I'm self-employed and doing other bits and pieces. But I'm on there and I will voice my opinions or get myself in all sorts of trouble for doing so. But
and beinghuman.org.nz, is that still relevant place to get understanding?
So one of the that's my website for, so basically kind of more the, I'd say like corporate health, but it's not exclusively that. So part of the reason for not spending so much time on social media is actually you want to get back into writing on Being Human. And the whole premise of the Being Human site is to try and get people to understand that we aren't machines and we need to stop working in the same way that machines work, or trying to keep up with machines. And so to kind of understand our own humanity, both from a biological perspective, but also a social perspective, and talk about the energy stuff and whatever else. So there's a couple of bits and pieces on there, and I hope to kind of build that over the coming months.
Fantastic, mate. So usually we get people to leave us with a thought, a way they live their life, or even a question. What would you like to leave us with, Jamie? Thanks again.
Jeepers, mate, on the spot. I'll keep coming back to, if I'm broken record, I just keep coming back for people to kind of to think about what are their sources of energy, what kind of makes them feel energized, what makes them kind of feel happy, who makes them feel energized and happy, who sucks the living daylights out of them, and just kind of map out your world as far as the positives and negatives as far as your energy goes. And then it's a real game changer. It's been a game changer for me. So I think when people get that perspective of their energy sources in their world, it can be pretty profound in terms of what it does.
Legend. Thanks, mate. We'll leave it there. That's been an awesome chat, and I'm excited to release this. And if you're in Christchurch, get along to that lecture as well. It'll be eye-opening. Cheers.